Imagine you're lounging peacefully by your own community pool, and someone shows up questioning whether you even belong. What would you do? That moment of stillness, the rare kind where the world feels hushed, where the sun's warmth wraps around you like a gentle blanket, that's exactly what Dorian Ree thought he'd found. At least, until things took a turn. It was a golden Saturday afternoon in Scottsdale, Arizona. The kind where the sun shimmers off every surface and the sky stretches out, deep and endless. Dorian, a man in his early 50s with neatly cropped salt and pepper hair and a fit, quietly commanding presence, had just completed a set of relaxed laps in the private pool at Sandalwood Estates, a secure, gated neighborhood where he'd recently settled after concluding a distinguished 28-year career as a Navy SEAL Admiral. He was finally adjusting to a slower pace. The winding, palm-lined streets, the serene views of the distant mountains, the quiet sense of safety, all of it gave him the feeling that he could breathe again. After decades of deployments, danger, and constant alertness, this pool had become his personal retreat. Dressed in a modest black swim shirt and trunks, Dorian dried off, dropped into a reclining chair, and let his eyes drift closed. Next to him sat a worn military duffel, its patches faded but unmistakable. He wasn't flashy. He wasn't making noise. He wasn't disturbing anyone. But sometimes, that's not enough. The silence broke with the crisp sound of heels clicking against the concrete. Then came a voice, sharp and firm, immediately raising his inner defenses. "Excuse me. Excuse me, sir." Dorian squinted up at the figure blocking the sun. A woman he didn't recognize stood before him, maybe mid-40s, with sharply styled blonde hair, oversized sunglasses, and a high-end beach tote dangling from one arm. Her name, he'd later learn, was Charlene Davenport. At first, Dorian assumed she was going to ask about pool rules or introduce herself as a neighbor. He sat up slightly, prepared to be polite. But her tone wasn't friendly. It wasn't even inquisitive. "You can't be here," she said, arms folded tightly. "This pool is for residents. Guests must be accompanied by a homeowner." There it was, not a question, but a declaration. A rule, weaponized. Dorian held back a sigh, choosing his words carefully. Decades of training had taught him the power of restraint. This wasn't just a neighborly mix-up, he could already tell. "I live here," he said in an even tone. "Just moved into Unit 14B over on Mariposa Drive." He offered a small, polite smile, an olive branch, hoping to keep things from escalating. But Charlene wasn't interested in bridges. She narrowed her eyes as if trying to see through him, as if the truth didn't quite fit her version of reality. "I don't think so," she replied, voice rising. "I know everyone in this neighborhood. You're not one of them." The smile faded from Dorian's face. He wasn't about to defend his identity to a stranger, but he also wasn't going to let frustration take the wheel. "I'm Dorian Ree," he repeated, standing and brushing droplets of water from his arms. "Unit 14B. Feel free to confirm with the property office if you'd like." But that wasn't what she wanted. Charlene backed away slightly, rummaging through her designer bag, pulling out her phone with purpose. "You have 2 minutes to leave," she barked. "Or I'm calling security. You're trespassing." Dorian glanced around. The pool area was empty except for the distant hum of a landscaper's tools somewhere on the street. He could see the determination on her face. She wasn't bluffing. Still, he didn't move. Not because he wanted confrontation, but because he knew he had every right to be there. He crossed his arms calmly, staying put. Charlene stood rigid, thumb poised over her phone screen. No attempt to de-escalate. No questions. Just a wall of hostility. And just like that, what should have been a peaceful afternoon turned into something else entirely. "Call whoever you need to," Dorian said evenly, his voice low and unwavering. "I'm not leaving a place I pay to live in." That only fueled her outrage. "You're making this a bigger deal than it has to be," the woman snapped, her tone clipped and hostile. "If you had any decency, you'd leave without a fuss." Dorian's eyes narrowed ever so slightly, though his body stayed composed. He already knew how the scene could unravel. If he responded with heat, he'd be labeled aggressive. If he simply stood his ground, he'd still be seen as a threat. Either way, he lost. She pressed her phone screen and activated the speaker. "Yes, this is Charlene Davenport. I'm at the Sandalwood Estates pool and there's a man here refusing to leave. He might be dangerous." Dangerous. The word dropped like a hammer. Dorian didn't budge. Not a flicker. His years in service had taught him to keep calm when chaos reared its head, and when people, intentionally or not, tried to twist the narrative. "Security's on the way," Charlene said with a smug edge, lowering the phone like she'd just won something. "Might be a good idea to start packing up." He didn't respond immediately, just studied her, taking in her expression. He could tell her alarm wasn't fear. It was assumption, arrogance. She'd written the entire story in her head the moment she saw him. At that moment, another resident, a middle-aged man in workout gear, towel over his shoulder, entered the pool area. He slowed, eyebrows lifting as he took in the tension. "Everything okay here?" he asked, eyes bouncing between the two. Charlene turned sharply toward him. "There's a trespasser," she said loudly. "I've already contacted security." The man gave her a puzzled look, then turned to Dorian, scanning his face. "You sure about that?" he asked. "I'm sure," she snapped. "He's not supposed to be here." Dorian held the man's gaze briefly, a small, patient nod, asking without words for just a bit of grace. Another neighbor, a woman in yoga gear, entered through the gate and paused, sensing the charged air. Slowly, others began gathering, a ripple of silent curiosity pulling them closer. Minutes later, a white golf cart rolled up beside the pool. Two uniformed security officers stepped out, one of them speaking softly into a radio. Charlene practically marched toward them, pointing back at Dorian with dramatic flair. "That's him, the man I told you about." One officer, a compact woman with no-nonsense eyes and a badge clipped to her shirt, raised a hand. "Ma'am, please relax. We'll handle it." They approached Dorian, not hostile, but cautious. "Sir," the lead officer said, "could we have your name and unit number?" "Dorian Ree, Unit 14B, he replied without hesitation. "Moved in a month ago. Feel free to confirm." Charlene scoffed loudly from behind them, muttering about how rules are rules. The second officer, a younger man, pulled out a tablet and started tapping through the community database. By now, a small crowd had gathered around the pool, teenagers with towels around their necks, a mom holding a toddler on her hip, a few retirees with wide-brimmed hats and quiet curiosity. The energy had shifted from afternoon leisure to collective witness. The lead officer's radio chirped. She listened, then turned to Charlene. "Ma'am," she said firmly, "Mr. Ree is a listed homeowner. His residency has been verified." Charlene blinked like she hadn't heard correctly. "He lives here?" "Yes, ma'am. Everything checks out." Her face went pale for a moment, and then twisted with disbelief. Instead of offering any apology, her jaw tightened, as if reality had betrayed her. And that's when the whispers started. People around the pool began murmuring more audibly. Side glances at Charlene, eyebrows raised, soft gasps under their breath. Dorian stood silently, composed, not smug, just grounded in a truth that didn't need defending. Charlene straightened up suddenly, her voice sharp. "Well, how was I supposed to know?" she barked. "He doesn't even look like someone who lives here." The air snapped. A sharp intake of breath came from somewhere behind her. A teenager muttered, "No way she just said that." Dorian didn't flinch. He tilted his head slightly, as if giving her a final chance to walk it back. But she doubled down. She turned back to the officers. "Are you sure your system is correct? Maybe he used someone else's name." These things happen. Her voice carried a fake helpfulness, like she was doing everyone a favor. That's when the man from earlier, Greg, stepped forward, towel still slung over his shoulder. "Charlene, stop," he said quietly. "You're making this worse for yourself. You were wrong. Let it go." She turned on him, eyes blazing. "You don't know what you're talking about, Greg." But Greg was done. He shook his head and walked away, leaving her to fume. Meanwhile, the officer reconfirmed through her radio. "Yes," she said aloud, more pointed this time. "Mr. Ree is the owner of 14B. A teen near the fence shook his head. "This is messed up," he whispered. Dorian finally spoke, his voice calm but undeniable. "You didn't ask me who I was," he said, looking straight at Charlene. "You decided what I was." Charlene opened her mouth, but no words came out. "You assumed I didn't belong," he continued. "And you called for help like I was a threat, when all I was doing was sitting here." He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. His words carried more weight than any shouting ever could. Charlene fumbled with her sunglasses, taking them off, then awkwardly slipping them back on. She looked around and saw the crowd of neighbors. No one was on her side. "You know," Dorian added, taking a step closer, "all of this could have been avoided if you just asked me a question first." Charlene mumbled something about just trying to protect the community. The woman with the yoga mat let out an audible scoff. "Protect us from what?" she said. "A man sitting by himself with a towel?" Charlene didn't reply. Her grip tightened on her designer bag. The security officer cleared her throat. "Everything's resolved," she said, her voice professional but pointed. "Let's all remember to treat each other with respect going forward." But the moment was already burned into the day. The ease of the afternoon had vanished. Dorian reached for his towel slowly. He didn't rush. He wasn't shaken. If anything, he seemed stronger now, like someone who had nothing to prove anymore. He looked at Charlene once more. "Next time, maybe start with hello," he said softly. "Might save you some trouble." Then he walked back to his chair, settled in, and leaned back with quiet confidence. In that moment, he looked like the freest man in the world. The officers returned to their cart. The spectators began to drift off, but the air still crackled with what had just happened. Charlene lingered near the gate, fiddling with her phone, pretending to be busy. But the illusion didn't fool anyone. The whispers continued, louder, sharper now. Greg sat beside Dorian in silence, offering a simple nod of respect. No words needed. A passing mom gave Dorian a soft smile. Even the teens offered sheepish glances, part apology, part admiration. Charlene couldn't seem to figure out how to disappear. She stayed frozen in place, waiting for something, anything, that might rewrite what had just happened. And then came Gloria Bennett, the property manager, a sharp-eyed, no-nonsense woman in her 60s, silver-haired and quick-moving, with reading glasses perched halfway down her nose. Her posture was all business as she strode through the gate, clipboard tucked under one arm. Authority clung to her like armor, and her expression left no doubt. She wasn't pleased. She headed straight for the security officers, speaking in hushed tones, nodding sharply. Charlene straightened immediately, smoothing her hair as if preparing for reinforcements. But Gloria didn't go to Charlene. She turned to Dorian. "Mr. Rhee," she said, her voice crisp and composed. Dorian stood to greet her. "Yes, ma'am. I want to apologize for the earlier disturbance," Gloria said formally. "We verified your residency, and I'd like to personally welcome you to Sandalwood Estates." She extended her hand. Dorian met it with a steady handshake. "Thank you." Charlene's jaw dropped. Gloria turned to her next, tightening her grip on the clipboard. "As for you, Miss Davenport," she said, her tone sharpening, "your actions today are being reviewed under our community's standards for potential harassment." The word struck like a gavel. Charlene flinched. "Harassment?" she echoed, stunned. "Yes," Gloria confirmed firmly. "You singled out another resident without justification, disrupted community peace, and made a baseless report to security. Those are serious concerns." Around the pool, the air thickened. People tried not to look like they were eavesdropping, but every ear was on high alert. Charlene's cheeks flushed a blotchy red. She fumbled for an excuse, but every word seemed to trip on itself. I was just being cautious," she stammered. "I thought he might be." She stopped. There was no way to finish that sentence without exposing the very bias she had tried to disguise. Dorian didn't speak. He didn't have to. Silence told the story for him. Gloria wasn't done. "Mr. Rhee served this country for nearly 30 years, she said, raising her voice just enough so the bystanders could hear. "He retired as a decorated Navy SEAL Admiral. His service and honors are not up for your judgment." A murmur ran through the pool area. Even Charlene looked rattled, as if the ground beneath her had shifted. Dorian just gave a small shake of his head and said with a quiet smile, "I'm just here to enjoy the pool, like anyone else." A group of teenagers glanced at each other, visibly impressed. One whispered, "He's a SEAL? That's wild." Greg, who had been watching from a nearby chair, leaned toward Dorian. "Yes, real estate school skips the common sense module," he quipped under his breath. Dorian allowed himself a soft smile. Charlene, by now, looked like she wanted to disappear. She clutched her bag like a lifeline, shrinking inward. Gloria scribbled a note on her clipboard. "We'll be following up, Miss Davenport," she said briskly. "In the meantime, I suggest reflecting on how you treat the people who live beside you." Then she turned and walked off, security trailing behind her. Charlene stood frozen near the gate, the fire she had entered with now completely extinguished. Even as people slowly returned to their chairs and conversations, the atmosphere had changed. The sunlight hadn't dimmed, but something in the air had shifted. A truth had been laid bare, and it wasn't going to be forgotten. Eventually, Charlene slipped away, head low, hurrying toward the parking lot with none of the drama she'd started with. No parting shot. No defense. just the weight of dozens of eyes watching her walk away. Dorian stayed exactly where he was, not out of stubbornness, but because he refused to let anyone dictate whether or not he belonged. Greg pulled his chair closer and sat down with a grunt. "Mind if I join you, Admiral?" he said, half joking, but with clear respect. "Please," Dorian said with a smile. And dropped the Admiral. "I'm just Dorian now." Greg smiled, settling in. The two men sat in companionable silence for a few minutes, the only sound the splash of a kid diving into the shallow end. After a moment, Greg spoke again, more thoughtfully. This place needed to see that. Dorian leaned back, letting the sun warm his skin. "Maybe," he said. "Maybe next time, someone will think twice." "I think they already are," Greg replied. Not long after, a woman with a yoga mat approached. Her name, as Dorian would later learn, was Selena Vargas. She placed her mat a few chairs down and glanced over. "I'm glad you stayed," she said quietly. Dorian opened his eyes and offered a faint smile. "Didn't see a reason to leave." "You shouldn't have to justify yourself to anyone," she said simply. He appreciated that. He really did. But he also knew life didn't always operate on fairness. "You're right," he said. "But sometimes it's not about convincing anyone. It's about standing in your truth and letting that speak." Selena nodded slowly, turning his words over in her mind. Across the pool, the group of teens had clearly been listening. One of them, a tall boy with unruly curls, finally called out, "Hey, Mr. Ree." Dorian turned his head, raising an eyebrow. "Thank you," the boy said, awkward but sincere. "For, your service. And for staying calm. I don't think I could have." His friends nodded and chuckled nervously, breaking their own tension. Dorian raised a hand in acknowledgement. Appreciate that. He could tell. It wasn't just another adult moment to them. This had stuck. A lesson without a lecture. After a while, Selena packed up and offered a final smile before heading out. Greg left soon after, leaving Dorian alone once more. But now, the silence didn't feel heavy. He closed his eyes again, letting the day settle around him. No shouting. No false accusations. Just the sun, the sound of water, and a moment of peace he'd earned many times over. Still, he knew the fight wasn't entirely behind him. Communities don't heal in a single afternoon. Real change only lasts when people choose to carry it forward. That evening, as the sky deepened into soft purples and stars blinked to life above the desert, Dorian sat on his back porch, sipping sweet tea and listening to the song of the crickets. He thought about everything, about the stairs, the silence, the false assumptions that had tried to push him out of place. It wasn't the first time someone had made a snap judgment, and it probably wouldn't be the last. But this time felt different. Maybe because he'd survived battles others couldn't imagine, only to come home and still be questioned. Or maybe because, finally, he wasn't standing alone. The woman jogging, the mom near the gate, the kids, even the guards, they'd all chosen to see the truth and not look away. Maybe change didn't always start with rallies or speeches. Maybe it started in quieter places, pool decks and front porches. One moment of truth at a time. He set his glass down, staring up at the stars scattered like silent promises. To be seen, to be respected, to belong. That wasn't something you should have to fight for. That was a birthright. And maybe tomorrow things would go back to normal. But today had left a mark. One that mattered. Maybe Charlene would think twice next time. Maybe those teens would carry this with them into adulthood. Maybe neighbors would talk, share, reflect. And maybe, if enough people stood up, not with fists, but with courage and clarity, the world would keep shifting, little by little. That was the kind of change worth believing in. Dorian smiled to himself. Small, worn, but real. This was his home now, and no one could take that from him. As he leaned back into his chair, desert breeze whispering against his skin, he knew one thing for certain. He belonged here. And sometimes, the quiet victories were the ones that mattered most. Underscore. If you've ever been misjudged before someone even asked your name, if you've ever had to prove your worth to people who should have welcomed you, know this. You are not alone. Stand in your truth. Stay calm. Stay grounded. And never let someone else's ignorance rewrite your value. If you believe in choosing what's right, even when it's uncomfortable, share this story. Because lasting change begins with courage in the everyday.